Let's talk VDML with KJR. Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk VDML. My name is Mark Pedersen, and today we've got John Fitzgerald and Stan Potums, and they're wearing their SmartAIConnect hats today. And I think maybe the easy way to kick off is just to let these guys introduce themselves a little bit. Maybe John, you first.
Yeah, g'day. So I'm the CTO at SmartAIConnect. I'm responsible for the development and kind of design of the product we're building, and which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly. And I kind of run the development team and the technology side of stuff at SmartAIConnect.
Stan, what have you been doing with these guys?
Yep, so I came on board with SmartAI as a machine learning engineer. So started looking at getting models on edge, but then also building the models. And then where we kind of segueing into is really like looking at making these solutions more transparent, more responsible, and ensure governance around that. So we'll shortly talk a lot about that today.
Yeah. Well, that's the perfect segue. So yeah, if we did take a step back, like what is the problem, if you like, that SmartAIConnect is solving? What's the specific sort of domain? And
yeah, we'll try and keep this to a brief summary, but this kind of was born out of the change in the security camera network, really, where suddenly security cameras, they started putting out AI models onto cameras. So before that, we'd just been using motion detection and stuff like that, but AI capabilities have been on cameras now for the last couple of years, and camera manufacturers are really embracing it, and it's going to be all the cameras before long that are running AI. So SmartAIConnect was formed because we were working with a camera manufacturer, and they were saying, oh, you can put AI onto your cameras. And we're like, oh, that's really cool. We should do something with that. We had cameras overlooking rivers and things like that. We had great plans of all these AI models we could put on the cameras, but it was really hard to get the AI models onto the cameras. There was the ecosystem for putting them on there and for getting the data off wasn't really there. So we thought, hey, here's an opportunity. So we formed SmartAIConnect to kind of facilitate getting AI models onto these AI cameras and getting the data off. And it's evolved as we got trial customers and they started trying to do it. They were very excited about our cameras. We can turn these into IoT sensors now. It's no longer just recording footage. We can actually count stuff and record stuff and alert when things happen. But quickly they started saying, well, what about the risks of running AI? We've heard things in the newspaper about supermarkets running AI and not telling people, and hardware store doing facial recognition to look for people and stuff like that. And incidents happened in America and all kinds of stuff. And so suddenly our expanding world of AI, where everyone was going to put AI in cameras, people were starting to go, oh, hang on, wait a moment. We're a little bit worried about AI, and that's where we've really extended our platform to focus on compliance of AI on the edge.
Yeah, so that's really a great story, though, to because I think it almost captures the history, if you like, of where the AI industry is at, where we've started off kind of like focused on the engineering problem. Oh, here's this cool technology. How do we use it? Oh, actually, how do we get all the moving parts to work? You know, the software, the hardware, get the tool chains, get that all working. So really focused on like the engineers' issues and the engineers' challenges, and then sort of almost stepping up and going, oh, but hang on, is this, now that we've got these things working, should we be using these things? What's the context? How do we apply good governance to this technology? So I think it's a really great story. Because Stan, you were involved as you said, with that initial challenge of just trying to get the models to run, and then since then you've sort of like gone further into your own, sort of training around that whole governance process, and I'll probably ask you a bit more about that shortly. But for you as a data scientist, as a machine learning engineer, what do you see as really important about that whole, kind of model provenance and management side of things?
Yeah, right. Yep. So I guess I've gone through the whole cycle, right? Like, hey, let's get a model. Let's try to get it on a camera, like solving that engineering problem. Now let's train our own model and get it on the camera. But it's one thing. You open a bunch of notebooks, you label some data, train a model, and put it on the camera. A few months go by, and it's like, hey, someone is interested in this model. Like, how well does it work? And it's like, oh, that's a very good question. I'm not exactly sure anymore. I forgot how we actually got to this model. So it's not reproducible. I don't know if there's any bias in there. So there's all these missing pieces to actually tell how well we can trust this solution. As John outlined before, like, hey, what's the risk of running these models? And you can't know that unless you know how this model came about. So going over iterations, I guess, we started pinpointing all these different tools, like you can dataset version, you can just record your random seeds, just all these little steps to get more reproducibility. But then also, that's the one thing that helps the engineer or the tech people understand what's happened. But then you also have to give that confidence to the deployer to know what they're deploying. And then a couple of years ago, we started looking at model cards as one of the possible solution there, and having all these different steps in the development phase, but then also all these frameworks like model cards to report back really helped closing that loop. Now we can easily go back and know what a certain metric means and how it came about.
And we'll probably provide some links in the notes for this to unpack this further. But like really quickly, what do you mean when you talk about a model card? What does that represent?
Sure. Yeah, a model card, the way we've done it traditionally, was here's a bit of a summary. This is the intended purpose of the model. Have we trained this model with the purpose of counting certain things, detecting certain things? What are we not trying to do? Because it's very appealing to just grab a model that somewhat does what we want to do, but it may not be optimized for that. So that could be a big risk there. But then also start explaining what were the classes, how was it trained, what was the ground truth in the training. And then there is a whole bunch of questions around how did you check for bias? How did you make sure the data was sourced responsibly? And these model cards, they've been evolving over time and they're still evolving. Now we're starting to see more standards and frameworks around that to I guess, have some standardization around these.
So ultimately, it might end up a little bit like a sort of a heart foundation tick of approval, but a little bit more detailed than that, and to a certain extent, we're sort of also, you might be putting on your model card, may contain traces of nuts or something like that, like You use it for this purpose, but beware that it's got these limitations, and that's really important. So, yeah, John, you've been talking with people that have been deploying these sort of models for things like people counting, but even for occupational health and safety, those sorts of things. Obviously, it's quite important to them that the models that they're running on their camera network are ones that they can trust and that they actually know what's running on their camera network, right?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting what Stan said about the model cards, because when we're training our own models, building a model card is straightforward. We know all that information and we can collect it as we go if we don't have it. But because our platform allows people to deploy models from camera manufacturers and from third parties that have developed themselves, and we've kind of said in our platform, look, if someone's going to deploy your AI app onto a camera, one of the things they need to do is they need to review the model card. They need to know about that AI model. So we've had to go to these third parties and manufacturers and say, you're going to have to provide us with a model card so that people know what they're putting on their cameras. And of course, traditionally, this has been the secret sauce of these organizations. And you want me to tell you where we got our data set from? No, hang on. And of course, so we've been getting a little bit of pushback on that, but at the same time, they understand, and coming regulations, which I'm sure we'll talk about, have kind of made them realise that they need to provide this information. They can't hold it so close to their chest. Yeah.
So, well, let's dive in a little bit more into the regulatory side of things. So, in practical terms, as you were saying, you started just working on how do I deploy a model that's been trained to do something like detect a person and therefore be able to count a certain number of people, or do something like detect, this looks like someone's fallen over. So it could be used for a safety purpose. So just the process of getting that onto a model, and then, as you say, getting that model onto a camera, and then, as you say, building up the information that's needed to have some trust in that model. And at the same time, you've got cameras that are sort of shipping with all sorts of stuff already turned on. So to a certain extent, there's this emerging problem where people may be running AI within their organization without really even knowing it, because there's a security camera there that's got face recognition enabled by default, for example.
Yeah.
Is that sort of a risk for people that they're trying to manage?
I think the problem is that a lot of people don't know or even care about this problem. So some people just want to put a security camera out there to record stuff. They don't know that there's AI on there. They probably, if we've talked to people and said, that you're running AI, you need to worry about the risks of doing that. But a lot of these are quite small companies, and to them this is just not important. And they're like, yeah, okay, I can see that could be an issue, but I'm not going to do anything about it. So the issue you talk about with cameras actually coming with AI on them is something we've been trying to address.
Yeah, because it might not affect smaller players, but larger organisations that have a bigger, if you like, sort of reputational risk. That's where it might start to kick in, and particularly if they're operating in jurisdictions where there's particular regulatory frameworks. So I know you guys have been looking at things like the EU AI Act and so forth.
So that's been a game changer for now that when we're talking to people who are running security camera networks. So like traditionally, most companies won't run their own security camera network. They outsource that to a security integrator. They outsource the responsibility of running that and managing that camera network to those people. now they're hearing about, there's AI compliance. Hang on, we got to be compliant with something. So they don't really understand. No one really understands what that means. They know that it's something that they need to do, and they know that they could be really big fines if they get it wrong, or maybe there's going to be fines in the future. But they don't really understand what it is. So they're going to their security integrator and saying, you need to take care of this. And of course, the security integrators typically don't understand this either. They come from a camera network kind of technical background, don't really know much about compliance, haven't really had to do anything there either. So we've been trying to fill the gap with our platform to try and this is something Stan's been working really closely with us on, is to try and make the upcoming legislation and the upcoming rules kind of understandable. And I won't say simplify, but we're trying to make them so that someone who is deploying AI into a camera can understand what they need to do to be compliant and not be so scared that they're doing the wrong thing, and at least understand, okay, so now I know what I need to do to be compliant. And compliance is not just a couple of check boxes and write a few things down. Like our company's having to go through ISO 27001 compliance, and if you've been through that, I'm sure you have, Mark, it's a long process. Yeah. It takes months and months and months, and there's a lot of work to be done. But what we're doing is we're providing people with the ability to have that checklist of things they need to do and work their way through it, while at the same time still allowing them to put AI on their cameras and know that if they get any questions about compliance, that they have the answers here, or we've done this so far and this is the path we're heading down.
Yeah. And I guess, the analogy with security standards is really relevant, right? Because I guess it's useful I always like to try and bring issues like compliance back to what's the practical risk, or what's the problem that we're really trying to solve. Because people, as humans, we love to create rules and we love to create bureaucracies, but it's always useful to come back to what's the real risk here. So, if you think about cybersecurity, the real risk is if you don't have like a well-practiced and well-run process of like onboarding users onto your IT system and then offboarding them, like closing down their accounts and managing exactly what people have access to and managing the way that you do updates and backups and things like that. The risk is that if you forget to do those things, there'll be an old account, someone leaves the organisation, they're disgruntled, but they still have access. And so they can get in and do something themselves, or it's an account that's not being monitored, and so it can be exploited, and no one really notices that a bad actor has got access to your network, and all sorts of things can ensue in terms of impact to your customers or your financial situation. So hence standards come in to say these are all the things you've got to do, and as you're experiencing, you've actually got to collect evidence and kind of like prove that you are doing all the things. It's not just a checkbox or a policy document that sits on the shelf that no one does. You've got to sort of prove that you're doing all the right stuff. So in terms of AI, I guess the risks are things like if there's technology that's being deployed like security cameras, and they've got facial recognition models running on them that no one's really paid attention to, there's a risk that someone or some part of the organisation goes, oh, this is neat, let's just start using this, without there being a collective corporate decision. And I think that's one of the situations that sort of transpired in Australia, where at the executive level, they're like, oh, we're not using any facial recognition. And then later, oh, actually we were, but now we've turned it off. There was a lack of governance internally because there was a capability there that no one had really agreed on. So it's really, you're helping people to solve that problem of going, what's the capability that we've got within our, in this case, security camera network? Which part of that is AI? Is that a trusted model? Are all the right people aware that we're using it? Is that approved? When we do an update or when we put more cameras in, can we have a look and see that that's still following the policy? Because you might have been compliant last month, but this month suddenly you're not compliant again because something's changed. Am I getting that sort of like right in terms of the practical kind of risks and where compliance fits in?
Yeah, no, you have, Stan.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's even historically, even before we're talking about these new AI regulations coming online, we had that issue, like you mentioned. We may be doing facial recognition or something else and storing private data on our service without us even knowing or those kind of things. Yeah. Now we're getting these AI models in the hands of everyone, really, like you mentioned. And I always seen AI as an automation tool. So cool, like I don't care what's behind it, but I can use this now to automate me getting certain analytics on which I'm going to base some decisions on. But because the AI is behind it, making those automated, providing this automated information, we definitely do want to know why it made these predictions and how much we can trust them. And that's what you see in this upcoming regulation. It's a lot of the EU AI is talking about risk-based assessments. So how autonomous is your solution? Is your solution end-to-end making decisions for you? Then you got to really be understanding what the AI model was trained on, what the limitations are, what the biases are. And I think that's a necessary thing, because even though we know it's an imperfect tool, we as humans, we do get lazy, and we'll start trusting the answer to the model, and having a framework that does that compliance checking and helps you with risk assessment just gives you that extra buffer to realize how much you can outsource, I guess.
Yeah. Forcing you to think through how that's being used. So you've dug in, and we probably won't have time in this chat to go deeply into. We've mentioned the EU AI Act, as it's called, but within the Australian context, ISO 42001, which is like an AI governance standard, is sort of the emerging framework that we're going to be referring to most likely. What are the sorts of things that 42001 sort of pushes or asks an organisation to be able to go, yep, we're doing the right thing with our AI?
Yeah. I'll just start there because Stan's been doing a lot of that work, but we already had, before ISO 42001 came out, we had really done a lot of research into AI compliance, and there were a lot of discussion groups and kind of agreed upon things that companies should be asking themselves before they run AI. So we set up a kind of a questionnaire-based system in our platform. Questionnaires about your organisation and questionnaires about the AI models you're using. But as Stan kind of looked into the AI regulations that were coming out, it was really, they moved the focus away from just the AI model, which might be person detection model, for example, and that you could just review that model and say it's okay to use in any scenario. The legislation is more focused on where are you actually using it in this scenario? What is the risk level in that scenario? You can deploy it in a public area, you can deploy it in a private school or a playground or something like that. So we've had to make a change in our platform now to move the compliance away from just model-based into kind of this concept of a project where you say, this is a project, who's responsible for the project, which cameras are running on, which AI models are we using, whereabouts are we sending the data. And then Stan's been working through the compliance regulations to work out now what are the controls that relate to that project.
Yeah. Yeah, so the context, I mean, even something like people counting, you could say, for example, the difference between using people counting to go, how many people walked through the CBD in the last month from the point of view of visitors or shopping or some sort of, you're just trying to analyze that with respect to some sort of marketing campaign or whatever, versus at the other end of the spectrum, maybe there's frequent like public protests about a certain issue and you're doing people counting related to that, and then potentially trying to profile or tie that in with law enforcement. It's a completely different risk profile, right? Like you might be using exactly the same model, but the way in which it's being used and the purpose and how that the kinds of decisions are being made are really very different. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So yeah, anything sort of further on that front, Stan, as you've been sort of digging into that?
Yeah, so that's exactly what all these different frameworks are looking at, like how are we using the model, and just a few things I reckon to touch on with those different regulations and standards, etc. They're talking about different players. So you have the whole supply chain. You have people who build model. You have people deploying models. You have people potentially using models. So all these frameworks and regulation has requirements, different requirements for each group. But bringing what Smart AI is doing, what we've been doing with the product is, how do we, it's one thing as a deployer to have to know what the model does, but if I can't convince my model provider to give me that information, or how do I know if my model provider is actually giving me information that meets those requirements while they're not applicable to me, because I haven't been looking at provider requirements. That's a gap we're closing, I guess.
There's another gap, just while you're on that, Stan, that now they've brought out AI models, camera manufacturers have, that allow you to actually train the models on the edge. So you can use footage on that video camera and actually train your own model. And like, who's in charge of the model card in that scenario? You've maybe just got one of your systems operators sitting there going, oh yeah, that's a thing. No, that's not. That's not. What's the accuracy? Where's that data being stored? Suddenly there's really quite a lot of risks involved in training that model. And we've been talking to systems integrators who've said they're forbidding their operators from actually using these models, because they just install security cameras and set them up, and they don't want to suddenly have their team being responsible for the AI compliance of these models that have trained up, right? So there's a bit of a risk kind of insurance issue there, where suddenly, oh, you're training AI models, or hang on, let's just see if that's covered in our corporate insurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's particularly when they are being used for sort of safety decisions or something like that. Like if maybe I'm just jumping to another kind of use of this sort of computer vision technology, which we've been doing a lot with AI for things like quality inspections in factories, right? Like you'll take snapshots of different parts as part of an inspection process, right? And yeah, if the model could be trained by the operators in that factory, and you might have been making brake parts for cars or something, and we'll tweak the model a bit to get it to work a bit better, and you actually stuff that up and end up with faulty, brake parts going out, then yeah, there's an interesting question as to sort of like who's responsible within that. I don't know if that's a realistic scenario, but I can kind of imagine it.
We had a similar suggestion where people were talking about having in a loading dock, maybe you train a model to identify forklifts, because obviously you don't want people in forklifts in the same area. And so if you've got your operator, you've trained up the forklift model, don't worry, we'll send an alert if there's any forklifts in the area, and it doesn't go off when the forklift comes in and someone gets run over. Oops.
Yeah,
that's not good.
Yeah. And exactly to your point, Stan, people do over time start to rely on a system that works well 90% of the time or 85% of the time. Or what about the other, 10%, 5%, 15%? And so this is really sort of focused around that kind of computer vision and sort of almost like the packaging of computer vision and that kind of camera technology. Do you foresee the same kind of, like, obviously the compliance standards are not so much specifically around computer vision and security cameras, they're really applying to any kind of AI solution. So do you see the work that you guys are doing here would also have like broader applicability to kind of like any sort of application of AI?
I think from a startup company perspective, that's too big a target for us to go for. I mean, yes, AI compliance could apply not just to edge computer vision models, it could apply to everything. But that's just too big a target.
It's good for you to be focused, but yeah, the same sort of principles or ways of approaching that would be something that would apply in other situations.
Yeah, 100%. I think that having the supply chain, like understanding the whole supply chain and linking that together, is definitely a concept that's transferable. But flipping around your question, we've been talking about computer vision models on edge. So originally I started looking at, we're talking about what's called a single purpose model. We've trained the model with a specific purpose, and now we're gonna deploy it, and it's just gonna detect what it's been trained on. Now we've all been interacting with ChatGPT and all that sort of things. These recently have been getting vision capabilities, and for a bunch of the work I do, I keep track of what's coming out, and I see image foundation models becoming edge compatible. So they're actually optimizing entire foundation models that can be run on edge devices. So you won't just be able to fine tune models on edge, as John mentioned before, but you'll also have open vocabulary solutions in the foreseeable future, I think, where you can just say, like, here is this big model from this big organization, which you can just tell it about, detect anything. That's going to be a very interesting thing to start looking at, how we're going to build trust around those systems, and how do we make sure
get a model card from those big foundation model companies, Stan?
Yeah, very challenging. So I mean, in your example just before, John, where you're talking about the operators might create a specific model for detecting forklifts, but with a foundational computer vision model that's essentially like promptable, you could you could just say detect forklifts, and if it's working well enough, it might actually detect forklifts because it has a concept of what a forklift looks like in terms of the word, and also its visual properties, and the ability to do sort of like image tracking and things like that. So we might start to see those more general use capabilities, and presents a whole new raft of governance challenges, because I think that's what we're sort of discovering with things like ChatGPT, is it's got latent capabilities that no one was really not the training organization, not anyone were really anticipating, and it's out in the wild. People start to try stuff to see what it can do. Well, we probably need to sort of like draw this conversation to a close for now, but I'm sure that there's heaps more that we could talk about. As we wrap up, what would be your sort of, if you like, any advice, words of wisdom for organisations that are dipping their toe in the water of adopting some sort of AI solution, whether it's specifically, I would say if they're putting in AI-enabled security cameras, they should go and talk to you guys. But, more broadly, if they're dipping their toe into the application of AI in their organisation, any sort of sage advice on where they should focus?
Well, I think I'd encourage it. Obviously, the capabilities of AI provide so much benefit to an organisation, but I think right at the beginning, you just need to set out your processes and be intentional about everything you're doing. So it's not really a time to just try a whole bunch of random things out and see what works, because it's very hard to then go back and say, okay, how did I get here? So I'd be quite mindful of the steps you're taking as you work through your journey of trying to get to this AI that's going to do something useful, to kind of make sure you record and keep a trace of what you're doing and how you got to each step.
Yeah. It's been exciting working with you guys on these sorts of things, and I think seeing what you're doing has definitely been an inspiration to me in thinking about that broader validation-driven machine learning approach, which is exactly about doing that sort of what's the context, what are the specific risks of this specific use, and then how do we track that validation process and build up that evidence so we go, oh, we know what's in this, and hopefully we can write a good model card as a result and track it all the way through the lifetime. So look, thanks so much for your time, and we'll provide relevant links. I'm sure that people who are doing this sort of stuff may want to jump in and have a look at SmartAIConnect, look at your solutions, we'll keep watching this space, because I'm sure it's just going to keep on evolving, right? So it's an
exciting time to be in the AI industry right now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Oh, well, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Dan.